Also, another important point is that in order to add JS documentation to a project, one must be able to commit to the repository where the code lives. So we always have to convince all of the authors, project authors, to allow us to add this type of documentation in order to add it. So yeah. So I can run a flow type inline file just with node directly. The types are just in comments and get ignored. Yeah, so basically we've chosen TypeScript for this workshop for a couple of reasons. So it's the most feature complete, so it has very rich typing features for very complex types. So if you have some inheritance in generics, then it has all of those features for you. It's also the most used, so it means if you are using TypeScript for your types, you're most likely to find typing for other modules that you're using. It's also got a good setup and integration with commonly used IDEs. But this is not to say that TypeScript is perfect. So a few of the kind of known issues of the ecosystem is that, so firstly, it changes very often. So TypeScript have regular updates, and these updates are not always backwards compatible, so they introduce some changes which may break certain types. This is can be frustrating when your types get broken by a new TypeScript version. Also, if we get the types wrong, then this is a big blocker for your productivity and can cause a lot of issues. Also, while the type engine is very powerful, if you use it wrongly or enter some weird edge case, then it can be very tricky to work with. So some patterns may be impossible to type properly. Also, it's a tool you add to your tool chain, which slows things down potentially. So for just using typings, it's not so slow, but your IDE is constantly running these types in the background, so it could slow down your developer's setup. So slide usually skipped. Yeah, so if we're going with TypeScript, question is, where do you write your types? So obviously the first option is you write them inline. So we saw with, example, JS doc, you can write these directly in the repository inline in the files. TypeScript, with TypeScript, you can't do that unless you convert it to a full TypeScript file, which for a lot of projects is unlikely to be taken if you send a pull request to say, I'll convert the whole thing to TypeScript. So it's a bit perhaps a bit too intrusive. The other way you can do it in the repo is in a .d.ts file we mentioned before. So this is a file that just describes the types exported by the module, so that when someone else consumes that, the IDE can pick up these typings and use them for type checking. But with TypeScript, we also have this other option, which is outside of the repo. So we can define types for modules and put them somewhere that then they can be loaded. So I don't need to commit them or push them to NPM for the specific module. I can grab them from somewhere else. So one place for that is this DefinitelyTyped project, which is a huge repo which has typings for loads of different NPM modules that are kept to a high standard. And you can then NPM install the types for the modules you need, and the types will be there. But you can also just put these in other places. You can publish your own module with these types in, or you can just put the typings in a .d.ts file in your project itself and have access to those. And yeah, so we're talking about building types for the DAT ecosystem. And this is also something that's not, so it's already been started, some of this. So I myself have in my project some types for hyperdrive and hypercore that I worked on. But this is not yet complete and not up to date with the latest changes. And also there's pull request to Hyperswarm that's still open that's adding types. So there's some work being done here, but it's not got to a point that we can all benefit and use them. We exported some slides I meant to skip by mistake. But, yeah, so to conclude this section of the workshop, so we think there's a strong benefit for that community to have structured documentation in these projects. And we also think that TypeScript is the best technology to do this at the moment. And what we're going to cover in the rest of the workshop is how we can best achieve that, and what the best plan of action is. So I'll pass back to Martin to introduce the workshops.
All right. So since we didn't know how many people are here and what you would like to do, we prepared 3 possible workshops. The first one would be about creating a pull request to DefinitelyTyped, in which we would pick different very small projects that we know, and see if we can get a pull request to DefinitelyTyped out, and look at what is entitled for that. You would need something like Visual Studio Code and a GitHub account for doing this. Workshop B would be to map the ecosystem, which is we would go out together, look at the projects that are out there, and map together how in what state the projects are, and trying to find information about that. We can later take this information and bring it to the discussion. And the workshop C that we have for you would be to set up a typed project, which is to say, you can set up together with us your IDE, and we look into what is necessary for a project to be typed, and what kind of things you need to take care of. All right, let me add a quick poll for these 3 workshops, A, B, C. And let's see if you're interested in something. Oh. I'm waiting a little bit more, but the answers are very interesting. Keep them coming. Ooh, I didn't expect this. Great. Wow. All right. So let me this because I really expect this, but virtually everyone wanted B. All right, we can do this. Great. Since everybody wants to map this with us, let's get started. So I prepared a small spreadsheet that we can use for this, and I need to find it because I am extremely sleepy. Sorry. I will pull it up. Give me a second. What we want to do is following. We look at GitHub repositories together. I will share a Google spreadsheet with you. I'm sorry. Yes, it's Google spreadsheet. We don't have Hypersheets yet. So there is a project going on that is called Hypersheets, where we should get something similar to spreadsheets, but available to everyone. So let me see settings. Let's make sure that everybody can view this. Okay, anyone with the link can be editor. All right, done. So here we go. I didn't expect this. I thought the other things would be much more interesting. Okay, so. What we have here is a spreadsheet, and I will share my screen for this now. Where did I just put the document? For reference and for everybody who is here, I'm in Japan, and it's 3 in the morning, and my brain is a bit, it's fun. Okay, so this is the sheet. You should see it. What I thought is we have a list of we have a list of notes here. Actually, let me add a few more just to see how they jump into this. To make sure that we get here, you can add modules here. Please go back. My computer is slow at the moment. Here we go. Okay. So add new projects here that we have, like Codex, the NPM project. It will automatically create a link. Then, because you have this link, you can look up if there is typed documentation on it. So you can go to your terminal and you can show types Codex, for example. And we can see if somebody made a Codex file. If there is a 404, it means it's broken. We write down what is the documentation state of it. So if we have Codex, we know it's not typed because I already I checked this before. So I know with Codex, here in the side, there's also no documentation here. I checked both, and there is this README documentation, which is the current state. So here is README API doc. And what I would like you to do now is to look at or list the projects thinking that you that ecosystem, that we are looking into the dependencies of these and check what the dependency is of each. And that we are building this to.
Yeah, to give a bit of context on why this is a useful thing to do. So in the data ecosystem, there is obviously a big collection of modules being used and is building a big graph. And when you use something high level like hyperdrive, obviously underneath there are many different modules being used. So when we want to write the types for hyperdrive, for example, we need already to have hypercall types. Otherwise, because hyperdrive exposes attributes which are hypercall, then you want to have the typings for the dependency there so that you don't have to write those types twice. So we're hoping by mapping this, we can basically find the right point and order to best add types to the ecosystem. So from this, for example, we would know, hey, we should add hypercore types before hyperdrive, because then we can reuse those hypercore types once they are published, for example.
We can also look at if there is an issue in the repository about types. So if somebody else worked on this before. I've now made these 4 repositories. And if somebody wants to look at it now in the workshop, I would ask you to add your name in here, so not the other person checks it. Sam, maybe you choose one and add your name so we can test this and add it there. You can also add more modules here, whatever comes to mind. We have hypercore, we have hyperswarm, but I would also add hyper3, which we know. Then there is Kappa drive. What else comes to your mind? Please add them. And as you can see in my screen, I see if you're interacting with me or not, and record it. So for the future, it would be nice if you would interact with me. I would be very much appreciative of it.
So you're only looking for core modules here?
I'm looking for modules that you think are important for the ecosystem, and I'm looking for which modules you think are important.
Yeah, I'd also note that so types are most used for modules that get consumed by many others, right? Because it's the documentation there. So maybe the end shipped project is not so important at types because it's not being used as a library by others. But anything that's kind of foundational or structural for lots of other projects would be higher priority.
This is particularly interesting for projects that you haven't worked at, that you're not familiar with, and that would you say are important. But you can do this for all of them. Like, for example, I don't know, maybe Beaker. Cabal. In a later point, I might ask you to vote on which one you think is most important. But for now, let's just look at the things that we think are important. We will share this document later. Okay, we have a few projects, and it would be nice if you could be looking at them to see what the documentation status is. Well, if you're in the chat, I will do this once for Codex. So I will look at, no, Codex I did before. Let's look at Hyperswarm. I will go into the repository, see how it works, because I take the npm package because the npm namespace is a bit clearer. Make sure that the repository is the same place. On my own node, I see that they have API docs because I know Hyperswarm, yes. But I've also noticed that there is typings for Hyperswarm open, where I use the pull request 56. There we go. And it is a dependency of core store. So I know this. I can write here. It is not typed. It is apdoc typed, and we're here. I'm sure everybody here knows how many of those projects are built and made. Thank you for just putting it together. Add my name. Okay. We have pretty much time for this. So I'm wondering if we can improve this matrix actually somehow. Can we create here a list of nodes that is more useful to you? Like has the, for example, one thought that came to mind for me is has the maintainer expressed what they would like to have? So when we create these issues, the goal of that workshop now is to create a table that we can talk about later, but also to figure out what is the maintainer's intent. Right now, it looks like most of those packages are made by Macintosh, but there are actually some others that are missing here that come to mind very quickly. So like Sodium JavaScript. Sodium JavaScript has several dependencies that come from Veros, for example. So at the bottom, I'm calling this sheet now projects, and I'm adding another sheet for persons and opinions. And in this, I thought it would be good if we know somebody who has a public opinion on something, if we know that this is the person, I'm going on to the second slide, for example, me, opinion, and we know the opinion on it. Opinions change, so there's a difference between what I'm doing and what I want to happen. So if somebody sends a pull request to my project that adds TypeScript kit, you'll at the beginning. So I'm pro typed JavaScript. And you can look at this at following link. So I need to improvise here a little bit, because first, we are a little few people, and second, I don't think that in this group we can track so much in this 1 hour. So let's increase it a little bit. If you have something you can add here. Maybe some evidence that we can find of what the people thought is a good idea at this place, and if they expressed their arguments. So can you find documents on the internet? This is basically a Googling workshop. I learn you how to Google. No, in this workshop, we try to bring together the knowledge of all of us that are here and figure out what we think that the that the way forward should be based on the information that we have around the ecosystem, what sort of typing they have. I will stop sharing for a little bit.
So, Martin, one way that might be somewhat easy is in source graph. If you just search something like this, I sent it to the chat. So if you check their whole profile, if you try to find anything with TypeScript at all, that might be some evidence that, you know.
Yes, it's a good idea. You will find the language of TypeScript. What you will not find is probably if it's typed or if there's an issue open on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good thinking. Thanks.
Also, if anyone has some more general questions about types and structured documentations, maybe from the presentation start, we can also take them while we're working on this.
Yes, we are able to answer questions while you're looking for it. I'm here. I'm looking a little bit through the things that I'm seeing here. What if the spreadsheet was a set of hyper websites with mounts? Hello, Eric. Yeah. The reason why Google is so comfortable is because I can make this document very easily and it works. Getting the details right is hard, and if somebody puts a real effort for this, I think that would be awesome. I think it would be awesome if Hyper had if we have a Hyper mount backed spreadsheet. And now that we're having a workshop, we really need to think. We had to really think about what tools could we use that everybody can collaborate with on. We could have also used like a text document, but that would be unstructured, and this way it was a little bit easier. Yeah, so thank you, Serapa, for the mention of the dependencies. Please add them. Definitely important. What we will put in here afterwards, like what I mentioned before, is what we put here. We can later put a bit onto a poll and see which ones do you think are more or less important. It's interesting that you try to make a tool for pulling in the docs from GitHub and put them on the website. So several other tools try to do that too, Serapaf. Several other tools try to do that too. They try to make better better documentation that looks better on a website. I do remember most interestingly, I found the effort like 10 years ago by CoffeeScript, where they started to do very nice CoffeeScript documentation that annotated the code side by side, so you could read the code and the annotation on the text would be right beside it. I thought that was really beautiful done, inline readable documentation. There are several other approaches to this. Most of them have failed in my experience due to hard case of maintainability, and getting it out structured, meaning trying to identify the structure out of it, would definitely be one approach that comes to my mind. Like trying to codify the way how Macintosh writes his documentations, basically, where we look at all the repositories of Macintosh and train an AI to extract the knowledge automatically and structure a document would be one approach. Oh, Marv, sorry for having been zoomed out a little bit. My screen is indeed a bit big. Sorry for that. You're looking for web tools that support typings. There are several online code editors that support full IDE things, similar to Visual Studio Code. I don't have them in mind, but they're like full-fledged IDEs, the same thing that you would get in a browser. Looking through the comments at the moment. So yeah, we will talk about this later. But during the presentation, we also thought like the flow types are a really nice thing. And if we have to type something ourselves, that would be really nice. The problem that comes with this flow typing is it doesn't integrate too well with TypeScript. Microsoft and Facebook quite obviously compete with each other, and as they are competing, they will try to make sure that they're not compatible with each other. But also, it is really a tricky topic, because if you look at TypeScript declarations and TypeScript definitions in detail, you notice that they can be quite complex. So they're particularly in the last, let's say, 7 releases of TypeScript. TypeScript does fairly often releases. In the last 7 releases of TypeScript, there have been added a lot of new features. Features that were really needed. Like, it was real problem in actual trying to use TypeScript in any way meaningful without those. And I'm pretty sure not all of them found their way to flow yet. Some of them are really, really tricky. Like, for example, you can have named arrays in TypeScript, which is something that is super useful if you want to reuse arguments for a type, which else you have to write the same thing over and over again. Some ways how to write generics and automatizations in the code are super tricky, and if you don't have a language construct that supports it, trying to port from A to B is really tough. So I think if we're looking at this for the moment, flow type might be the smaller set of tools that you get. So with flow, you might have less options of how to express your documentation, and as a consequence, it will lack expressiveness, but also it might be easier to get flow types to run with TypeScript than the other way around. So if we write TypeScript, that has been a consideration. If we write TypeScript, then we will need to stick with TypeScript. Whereas with flow type, there is that we can get ready for being used with TypeScript. However, getting something on definitely typed is a different issue. Like being able to share your documentation with other people. I wonder if that DNS is still used. Let's make another 5 or 10 minutes of this, and then we can maybe jump into a discussion in a review and then into the discussion. if you look through those repositories, and while looking at those repositories, I encourage you to look at how they were written. Let me share my screen for this. And maybe I can zoom out a little bit so that it's not so big before that. Give me a second. So oh, this is too big. Here we go. Let's use this. All right. Okay. It's all right. It's okay. Share my screen. So, oh, this is bigger. So we're looking at a project, and the project that I was just looking at was .dns. And when I was looking at .dns, I saw that the documentation is here of those things. Like he put in the documentation in a code block, and he also, the writer here, I think it's a he, the pronoun is correct. It was Paul. And in the example, you also have the example code here. So on one side, you get the documentation, and on the other side, you have the example code, which makes it different from how other code is documented. Like if you look at the style from this towards like a prototypical Macintosh project, we will see that the README style, the way it's written, is differently. It doesn't have the same style, and as its style is different. So here is maybe a Kappa drive style, where you also have the example API on top. This is more prototypical, where you get the documentation here for each of those documents. This is a little bit better parsable. But if you look at the .dns, it's a bit harder to parse. It's harder to parse both for machines and humans. And the question is, do we need to consider that later in the discussion? Should we think about when we see this documentation and when you look over these projects, do they express their wish for the people to have easy and introspectability? We can also look at, if we look a little bit closer on projects, we can also look what other dependencies might they encounter. So for example, in debug and URL, most certainly we'll have some documentation in TypeScript. I don't even need to check that. Same for query string, but call me maybe, that might actually be very important. So call me maybe. Or 04 on call me maybe. Oh my, call me maybe has been used by many. I know this. I saw this often. This is a big one. Call me maybe has surely had its fair share of people looking into it, how it works. Another way how I can find out what that person is interested into writing is I can look at and make sure or see what the recent projects are that they have been working on, and if they used TypeScript project or typed languages at all. So here we see that, for example, Linus. Sorry, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. He may really be a JavaScript fan because everything he wrote is in JavaScript. There is no type definition, but also he hasn't worked on this for a while, and maybe it might be a good idea to work on this. But here we have TypeScript definitions. And he was actually thinking about this. Look at that. And he said he will look at it later today. How many issues do you have on your GitHub profile that are written like this? On August in 2018. I will play around it, and I expect I will pull and publish this relatively soon. These are really just indicators of us trying to figure out how things would work. Just reiterating. Narrating our time together at the end of your day in Europe, or end of the conference, before Morph's workshop, which is surely a little bit more interesting to people than writing about stupid TypeScript that definitely nobody has interest for. I think we intended for this section to be a little bit shorter, and I will come back here now. We intended it to be shorter. What do I mean with this? We intended for this to be a group talk and maybe have 2 workshops at the same time, where we do different parts together and then come together and get our findings. Okay. I don't know how many people are here. It looks like we're not too many. So you can open up your microphone and see if you're here. Just get a quick ping out and see if your microphone is working, and then we can talk.
Scooby-Doo.
Hello. Yeah.
Hey, me too.
Hey. Hello. This is great. Okay, a few people we have here. When I look at the repositories that we pulled together, like we did collect a few, I see that many of them, none of them have, I didn't see one that has TypeScript definitions ready or type definitions ready, which is an indicator to me when I think, it just happened. What? Yeah, okay. This is an indicator to me that we do not spend any time and effort to make it easy for other people to come into our projects. We think that the README files might be enough. That is my indicator. I think that when I read through those issues, that there have been some efforts in trying to put it into structured documentation. I wonder why this is the case, and I would like to ask around into the group, what do you think? Why why didn't we find type definition? What do you think? Why it's not here yet?
I can say from our perspective, at least, we usually want to build something, and then we're building and building, and then when we're done, we're so tired that we're like, oh my God, now documentation. Okay, let's just write something so that somebody can run something. And this is one problem. So like kind of extra work, kind of, you feel that this is not that important. I mean, I know that it is from communications perspective, but it's not code, you know? So this is one part. And another part is also like some nice template. If I would have a template that I know I always fill out, but then I again have to think myself into like how to structure the whole communication, where, what. So yeah, that's my problem at least.
So yeah, this I think is common across many projects. Like everywhere in software, the documentation seems like extra effort that is not helping me get where I want in the end. One of the advantages of what we're proposing here with these type definitions is that now the documentation looks much more like code, which makes it easier to write, I think. So it's less thinking about how to structure the README to communicate these things, rather than like, okay, I just write this specification that defines this stuff, and then there's no extra effort more above that necessarily required to get a pretty good base level.
I could comment on why I don't have structured TypeScript stuff in any of my code. I don't use TypeScript. And I don't use. Oh, Eric, you're echoing. Sorry. And I don't use any fancy IDs with auto completion. And I usually just do a README and document everything I can, which is really hard with the whole like gigantic options constructor. Very hard. But for most other options, it's not too hard. And usually I try to document the stuff that is relevant. So like I have the .SDK docs where I've just been compiling a whole bunch of things together, and I'm trying to just improve them to a point where it's usable. And if like you really need something, then you go under the hood and go to the extra details. But I don't know, adding TypeScript support doesn't benefit me much. And it's like an extra thing to maintain in addition to regular docs, because it's not like I'm going to get rid of my README docs just because there's TypeScript. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing. I'm not against it, but I don't really have any benefit myself for having it. That's probably the main motivator.
Would you have a question that I would ask in this direction, would you have profited from having structured documentation before you started with that?
Probably not, because I just read the README and the source code, because I don't use IDs for auto-completion anyways. And honestly, if I'm reading the like TypeScript docs, then that's basically reading the source code, so I might as well read the source code. Also, I absolutely despise auto-generated docs. Like docs that are generated from the type definitions, they're usually total shit. They're just like, okay, here's abstract interface foo, and it has all of these like variables, but that doesn't mean anything to me because people usually don't fill it in. Like when you have the tooling to generate docs from types, people get super lazy. Whereas I find in a lot of README-based approaches, people at least put in the effort to add some runnable examples or something I can copy pasta. But I don't think I would have benefited that much, personally. But that's just me. I'm not saying that no one else would.
That is fine. That is fine. I like the input. I have something to say about this, but maybe Diego can speak, can share his thoughts.
Not that much of that I just put in the chat. It's been a while since I'm using the JSDoc approach, which is something that, since it's quite old, most IDEs and editors have support to it. So you can easily add JSDocs. They help you to explain what you want to do with that function. TypeScript supports it, so you can have some sort of type validation just right in JSDoc. So that's cool. And it's just like a documentation at the end of the day. So it's just not like that you're learning like a new type or a new language or something like that. But yeah, just one thought. And also, I like the README-based approach. I guess that when things are small, it's easy and puts some effort on your side. That reminds me on things like, for example, changelogs and the debate between automatic changelogs and human-generated changelogs. So when you have a human-generated changelog, I guess that the comments and the things that you put in are more explicit somehow and more clear at the end of the day. And that helps when there are some issues and when you need something. And it's a lack in our ecosystem. Like a very few projects has a changelog or keep a changelog or maintain a changelog.
I find that interesting as well because having a keep a changelog, it's wonderful. But if you have, so the one thing that is really nice about types, that I always thought is nice about types, is if there is a change and it's properly typed, it will just break the thing. You know, like even without a changelog, you know, shit, something broke. You can even make an indicator that towards your users that this use will be breaking outside of deprecation warning or something like that. And also because you see in an IDE often what options pop up, you will notice changes over time. Like if, downloading it the first time and downloading over time, it is a way of a changelog. Metanomial, maybe you can share your idea, concept of why do you think we do not have structured documentation, and do you think we need them? While metanomial is typing, I would like to ask to Nina, what if we don't write TypeScript? So we are talking here about structured documentation, not necessarily TypeScript. The DTS files, they look like TypeScript, but they are not. You can use them, you can just publish your stuff as JavaScript, and it just works. The question is more like, how do we write our documentation that it's working? And I find the comment of Morph quite interesting, and also it came up with Diego that there is a lack of expressiveness if we have things automated. There is a lack of let's say enjoyment of writing this, and if it's automated, it doesn't give much insight. Now that is a very interesting aspect that I haven't thought about before, honestly. Like how much joy needs to go into something for it to be good. And when I wrote my typed projects, and that is something that maybe is interesting to the people who do not use IDEs with type completion. type completion can be done in a way of love. You know, like you can make typed, like that is something that I at least experience. You can put really a lot of effort and care of detail into it. I worked on a project where I tried to make sure that the callbacks show up neatly. So I would make sure that the things that are actually hard for me to understand, like what the result of an async operation is it a correct result, or the things that I would always need to console log or try to figure out what is inside there, instead of a console log that I get it immediately, a kind of care towards me in the future and towards the people using it. It's just a little bit of something that I want to add. But yeah, that's another perspective that I found funny.
Can I just add one comment, maybe? Sorry. Sam, I jumped in before you unmuted. But you know what I'm thinking, Martin? This approach, what you just mentioned, is fantastic when you have something like hypercore or like some frozen, I mean, or like, how do you say this? When it's a complete module that is working and now you can just improve this documentation. But when you have like work in progress, it's crazy. It's changing all the time. So if you want to maintain also this documentation so clean, you just go crazy. That's at least, again, from my perspective.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make is that I found it interesting hearing these different point of views. That so Martin and I wanted to do this workshop because we both like types and we chatted about it and wondering why are there no types in the ecosystem and why the like existing pull requests maybe get some resistance. And it's interesting to hear the different perspectives on this. So yeah, it's why maybe we just have a different perspective. We're not saying like our way is better, but is beneficial for some parts of the community, while there's other parts of the community like doing it just with readers. One of the interesting properties of TypeScript that maybe helps with this is that, like you said, people can write types without touching the projects themselves, so they can also, we can do this documentation without kind of getting in the way of the people who like doing it with readers, for example.
Maybe Jeremy, can you share your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not working on DAT-related code, so that's why I've been largely mum and why I didn't touch much in the spreadsheet and instead did sort of ancillary stuff, like tried to see what search stuff could be done. But in general, I found that having to work with low-level languages, high-level languages, various polyglot projects, etc., over the years, I'm fairly exacting and like neurotically fastidious about, like, I need, if it's going to be formatted and it's going to be neat, I can't have it be one line be 61 characters or 61 columns and the rest be 60. They need to be perfect. So I need the linting to be perfect. If it's going to have the effort, it's gotta be perfect. So for me, ultimately, I have just completely on personal projects, I have completely abandoned the notion of caring about individual languages, different comment styles, like different block comment styles. I just have a way of writing at the top of the file where I might have to change the comment character. But apart from that, I'm essentially just writing a plain text file that has like some spacing between, like just some characteristic spacing and some, you know, like vertically and horizontally, and just some simple conventions, sort of like RFC style. And I just stick to it regardless of what language I'm working in. And if I need to pull it out as a README, I can just slap it into Markdown because I have conversion to that. So it's It's just something that I've built out of sheer annoyance over time that serves me well, but it's a testament to the fact that this is not really a solvable problem, because you either write extensive inline documentation or you write extensive outline documentation. You don't really mix these things.
First off, Metanomial is here, and I will comment to that quickly and before I call you up. I remember a project that I did 2008-ish, where I had it for, again, I did ActionScript, and what I did there was, there is a standard like Java doc style homepage generator that generates the homepage out of it. And what I did 2008 was, I looked at the code and completely modified it so it looks really, really cool, and it works smooth on all browsers, and it works on mobile, and it looks fancy, and you get like the console, like where you can jump between the documentation, and where it gets nice formatting and images and stuff like that in working neatly. And it was a lot of effort. It was super fun for me, but it was a lot of effort, and I really enjoyed working on that formatting, so the generation of A to B, and finding a long form documentation. We try to highlight this in this talk. It's really not about the format. So having TypeScript is one option, but as you are mentioning, Jeremy, I think it might be interesting for other people to also learn how to write in your format, because you already built the generators, and maybe we can also see if another form of structuring the content, like if, for example, if you say, okay, the README is required, all right, then maybe we can generate, we can make sure that the way we write those README structured are.
Yeah, so I think that in general, the typical, I think that across any given language, you're probably going to see something that looks like Python norms being probably the best that you can typically expect, where like the README only is like the worse is better outcome, where at least there is something. And then if you have like the multi-line function comments and the class comments that can then be converted into the shitty auto-generated documentation that everyone hates on top of the README, that may in some way be, you could massage that into real documentation later on a little bit easier. But I think that it just strikes me that people don't really want to do both, because it's kind of like you're writing like a section of a chapter of a book, but you've dislocated it from the rest of the book. It's like you've divorced the context, and there's this collocation of context that you would like to either have the reader read it all near the code, or basically not have to worry about where the code is, but you don't really want to have them have to jump back and forth between what is just some semi-structured text document and inline code, right? I mean, preferably one thinks that's anyone who comes across a GitHub repo probably is not you don't assume that they are ready to jump into code, right? But they might be able to read a README and get something from it, right? So what do you spend more time on? The thing that is probably lower friction and higher return, or the thing where probably 90% of people won't even make the third click to the file?
I think we got it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just rambling.
This is all right. Like,
I will say though that restructured text, I think, is what the painful, if people really want like plain text syntax to be extremely rigorous, restructured text seems to be the thing that they end up going for. Like if Markdown isn't enough, but they still want to write long form, I don't know. No one likes it.
Okay, I think metonymy I like now. See what he has to say, or they have to say. Sorry.
So I'll talk a little bit more about change logs. Jeremy, right?
Yep.
Who was just speaking? Yeah. So you brought up inline versus outline documentation as kind of the distinction between the two types of documentation. But I would say that there's a little more than that. There's also documentation of the here and now, like here's a README that shows you what the project is like right now. But then there's also kind of the phase-based documentation of where the project is going, where the documentation has been, the motion of change. And that is something that gets forgotten all the time. And in projects where you don't have a lot of inline documentation, like a change log is crucial if this is a public, anything that is receiving community contributions, because if you don't know where the project is going, it's hard to just jump in. Whereas if there's a clear, concise, like here's the things that we've been working on slowly, you kind of have an idea immediately. Okay, the next thing is this. Oh, these things are being deprecated. Don't worry about messing with those. And it's a bit of documentation that often gets forgotten. And so I would put that in the same category as README based approach, right? README and a changelog are complementing. And I would put that also with the license. The license allows you to move forward with the project. So those three, changelog.md, readme.md, and license.txt. Those are the three that you see in a lot of projects.
The way I would specifically characterize that is a balance between referential transparency of what it is that you're about to encounter, like a giant all caps document that says changelog.md versus nearness to the thing that is being modified. Like you want it to be as close to the thing as possible, but you also want it to be glaringly obvious that this is the thing and what it is. So that's why we have these all caps files, right?
To notice. Even if you have a lot of structured inline documentation using TypeScript or JS docs or a combination of both, I still like keeping a changelog in the project. And of course, it README, but just minimal at that point because you don't need to document everything if there's generated documentation. But like changelogs, they're important. So that's a big part of documentation that people forget a lot.
I wonder if, so yes, changelogs are important, but I think what in most cases they do is describe the why. So why hasn't been changed? Because, so we can also describe changes with having typings, for example, and use version control. So you can look at specific types in the past, and you can see the diff of the types, for example, to see the API, how the API changes. Obviously, and this is just a technical difference. Doesn't tell you why the changes were made, and that's where the commit messages or the changelog provide more context, I guess.
Diffs are not very human readable, and it's still a huge barrier of entry if you're trying to jump into a project and the only face-based documentation is the diffs and the get commit messages. It's the whole point of writing a human changelog is so that other humans can read it. And it depends on the size of the project, whether that's really necessary or whether you can get away with generated changelogs as well. But it's something I don't see enough of. People often just say, oh, the VSC will take care of it. That's it. Personally,
what I would like to see, having fallen out of keeping up with updates on DAT for quite a while because I was busy with other things. I would like to see something akin to Paul's basically catch-up talk type of material in the broad strokes README information. Like if you hit the community hub repo of DAT, I would like for basically that slide content, like why are things named different now? What has been consolidated into which things? What are those packages claiming to be? How, those are things that, I can always dig in deeper to the technical, like nuts and bolts, where the nuts and bolts are. And I think that anyone who is actually going to work with the code expects that. But the broad strokes, like why things have changed and how they have, so that you can get an overview picture. If you don't have that, you tend not to really ever focus enough to really circle back around to the project.
Yeah, and this is a general documentation issue, which is again also something that is being discussed in the community. And I think, as it's been mentioned before, documentation is a lot of effort to write. A lot of people don't want to do it, and also it's difficult to get funding for. So in the consortium, this is often discussed, like how do we improve documentation? And how do we also keep it up to date with the changes that happen? So a lot of people are writing new code to move things forward, but the documentation doesn't land there to say what changed and what's different now. And also writing this documentation in a way that anyone who drops out the project and comes back gets the diff that they need is also challenging. I'm not sure there's any project solving that problem.
There's also some point that I think nobody else has spoken up about yet, which is collaboration. One of the other workshop options that we had was to create the DefinitelyTyped project, where we actually, where Nina could learn how to write types and publish it. And the interesting part of how DefinitelyTyped works is you do not need permission of that person to publish it. You can do this completely separate from that person, and you can basically hijack the documentation process of another person without their permission, which is super strange from a traditional human author process. But in an annotated web, this is quite interesting, right? So creating, for example, annotations on projects from outside perspective. So if the maintainer writes some code and we have a structured outside hype changelog, like bringing this up now brought even the idea to head that we could write a browser extension or a BK extension for that matter, that every time when we read when we go to a GitHub page, it shows on the right side if somebody else wrote a structured changelog for it. Where it was like, yeah, I looked at
data, right? You could have structured documentation be some form of linked data, but then it's kind of like you can always buy a domain that's offensive and point it to someone else's domain so that it redirects. Like then it becomes a matter of how do you want to characterize someone else's thing.
Totally. Well, the thing that maybe is mostly relevant here is the discussion around in DefinitelyTyped. There are quite a few type definitions that may not be up to date, or where people who use them in TypeScript projects complain with the original author of the project, like your definition is wrong, something like that. So where it's like, I don't want to maintain this. Somebody else wrote it, but everybody complains about this to me now. Yeah. Which brings me a little bit back to the question. So structured documentation might be something that we can add to the DAT project, to the DAT ecosystem, with let's say without consensus. They don't need to consent. They don't need to commit to getting the structured documentation, and we can add those to the projects together as a community effort. We could ask, we could set up a list like we did before, and we will take the Excel sheet with us. But we can set up a list like this, and we can maybe direct some of our maybe even funded effort to try to get typed documentation to it by people outside of the project that just might want to make sure that this works. And Eric mentions that in a corporate environment, typed languages help prevent mistakes. I find corporate environment such an interesting term, because these days Microsoft is probably one of the biggest corporations, and they do so much open source work in community work these days. All of the things that happen in GitHub, all those codes, and they help me prevent mistakes everywhere. So that was one point. Like, okay, quick question to everyone in the room: do you think structured documentation is something we need? Structured. Once more, doesn't need to be typed. Do you think that is good for the project? And do you think TypeScript is a good choice? Just quick answers if you have something.
Structured, yes. TypeScript, yes.
I should
Nice.
have a
Nina. Oh, define. I thought we defined it. Structured means human computer readable. Structured metadata means that you have the same metadata for a set of projects, so you can index them and get more insight automatically.
Martin, I think you're muted.
Indeed, I am. I have 2 mute buttons, and I often forget which one I pressed. It's funny.
Was semantic versioning ever brought up in this chat? I missed the beginning of it.
We did talk about it in the changelog discussion. Yes, it came up a little bit. And the point about semantic versioning, no, semantic versioning not. Semantic changelog came up.
But
I think everyone knows semantic versioning, but people don't use it right.
I think on a lot of the hyper modules, they are trying to use it. I think Macintosh does mostly follow this. Like we had the Hypercore 9 to 10, or was it the Hyperdrive 9 to 10 when the breaking changes came. And yeah, this helps you know when something breaks downstream. But I don't know if it counts as that much documentation.
My experience with somewhere is that for casual work, it's awesome. Like for things that only have one set of modules and that have no great tie-ins, it's great. But if you want to use this for a product, like if you grow from module towards product, where a lot of things tie in together, where you have your server that needs to be at the same state as your mobile devices, as your desktop, as your tractors are running, then the somewhere is only so much helpful. In a community sense, I think it's really great, and people not using it right is a matter of education. But I think the same thing can be said about all structured documentation or any documentation at all. You can write a README file and nobody understands what you're writing about afterwards. You can write class types that absolutely don't match your classes. You can write code that doesn't function structurally, and all we can do is try to make sure that we do our best when we write somewhere, we do our best when we write the structured documentation, and hope it's good enough. Nina, please share.
Yeah. Basically, I mentioned already we were working in the Ethereum Foundation for 3 years as contractors. And I noticed there, because there is like gazillion teams also, like they had the same problem. And they tried to make some kind of a structure that everyone should use, but it just didn't work because every team has preferences, requirements, different kind of habits, and it just didn't work. So what they figured out at the end is that what is important is for some people who are like new to the ecosystem, or somebody who was away for a while and wants to come back and kind of catch up on things, to have like a web page. They just did it as a web page, but like some place where they maintain what is currently in use, what is deprecated, what, you know, like what are the things that are being used in the ecosystem at the moment. And this like changed a lot. So maybe that kind of approach could also be something we should think about.
Just to make sure that I understand this right. So what you're talking about is that instead of trying to standardize the way we want to make sure that the documentation works, and TypeScript definitely is a way to try to standardize this. Instead of that, we're trying to make sure that the onboarding is done better. That we make sure that when we have an onboarding process, like it could be YouTube videos, it could be conference talks where we have introduction course, it could be something like workshops that we regularly have where we define the basics of our thing, that we just do this regularly and make sure that the basic is there. Do I understand it right?
I was more thinking like one page where everybody knows this is the place where you go, like, I don't know, .-project.org or whatever, where you go, and there you can find a list of modules that are currently being in use. So for example, you would in a couple of months find a hyperspace there instead of hyperdrive, because maybe it will just not be in use anymore. And maybe, I don't know, like, you know, some stuff, like I think some gateways and stuff like that are now deprecated already, but they're still floating around GitHub. So you don't know if this is still in use or not. So somebody to be like a editor in a magazine or something, you know, to clean and take care always to update what are the modules that ecosystem is currently using. Does that make sense? Like a list, basically, pure list, nothing else.
Okay, I get it. I see the value of this. What I find interesting about that thought is also that by having a list and having it at a place, and I'm pretty sure if we write a list in these days, it's either on a wiki or in Git, that it would also function as a changelog over time. So you could look at that list over a longer period of time, and it would become this history document for an organization. And I'm not sure how that list looked like for the Ethereum Foundation, but also for that, or the that ecosystem, it would mean that for the projects that we use, we would need to create a list format of things that are important to us. So what the list contains means it shares a sense of things of importance, and that is something that needs to be what I wanted to mention before, is that this needs to be a regular task, you know, like a reoccurring task that you do together to find out what is important. That's what I meant to say. Yes, Eric, that's true. By the way, Eric, did you talk yet? What's your opinion? Okay. if I can summarize today's discussion, or I'll take 1 minute, maybe afterwards Sam can take 1 minute or so to summarize the discussion for today by our own words and see what we can do in future. What I summarize and what I take away from this workshop, and I'm very grateful actually that so many here spoke up, is I need to rethink this. I need to rethink TypeScript. I need to rethink the ergonomics of writing that. I want to think about new ways to do this, and I would love to have more collaboration or shared thought on this. I will also, I'm also taking note that this is an external effort that people have to deal with, and structured information is a creative process. That is the biggest thing that I take with this. I'm also noting the importance that people here put on. I also noted the importance that people put here on documenting change and making that visual. That seems to be very important. And as far as TypeScript or type documentation goes, it didn't seem to me like there's a big negative on it, but there's also a very big, there's not a big positive on it, which is to say the people in the community, for this to be successful and appreciated, the people in the community need to see the value of it. And maybe I wasn't able to highlight this properly, and we should do this. We should rethink on sharing how we think, how and why we think this would be really valuable.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for this really interesting discussion. Yeah, like Martin, I learned a lot about the pros and cons of how we can do this in the best way. And what actually the specific pain points for different people are in this whole issue of how best to document what we do and help new people in the community pick up projects and understand how to use these things and learn the best way to work with this all the code we have. So yeah, I think I have to digest a bit all this and think about what we can do about in general about documentation. Like I said before, this is I think a lot of open source communities that work on kind of volunteer and project funding struggle with this because it's difficult to fund, and there's not enough of motivation, as been said, to work on this aspect. And we can think about what the best approach is.
So please unmute your mic. Sam?
Mm-hmm.
Put your hands out. This is like the Japanese thing that I love so much. If anybody wants to join, it's okay, but he has the camera here, so I need him because you see his hands. So at the end of an event, we would take one breath and then clap together to say thank you. And it's like, I am practicing it for a second. So it's like, se no, and everybody claps at the same time. If you want to enable your microphone, it's good too. I just love it at the end of the event. I'm really exhausted, and this is just so much fun. Okay, se no. Internet. Let's try that again. Se. Wait, you can say it with me. Can do so we can get a reverb. Se no. This works much better in a real setting. Let's hope we see each other again in real life. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Sam. All right. Well, yeah. The day 2 of the .conf conference is getting closer to the end, but there is one more thing. We have the mob workshop. This will be about building or making stuff with that SDK. So if that is interesting to you, please join us. It will start soon. So thank you very much, everyone.